The rain didn't fall so much as it wept, a steady, gray drizzle that blurred the lines of the city outside the cafe window. For Leo, hunched over a cooling Americano, the world was a smeared watercolor. But his focus wasn't on the weather. It was on the woman 3 tables away, her presence a quiet earthquake in the mundane afternoon. Her name was Elara. He knew this only because he'd overheard the barista call it out with her order, a hibiscus tea, no sweetener. For 47 minutes, Leo had been pretending to read a book, his eyes tracking the subtle symphony of her being. See, most men, Leo thought, would see a beautiful woman absorbed in a sketchbook, her charcoal pencil moving with gentle certainty. They'd see the auburn hair escaping her loose bun, the delicate wire of her glasses, the focused curve of her mouth. They'd formulate a plan, a compliment, a question about her art, a bold introduction, and they would miss everything. Leo watched her left hand. It wasn't drawing. It rested on the closed sketchbook, her fingers tapping a silent, a rhythmic pattern against the cardboard cover. Not impatient, but pensive. Her gaze would lift from the page not to look out at the romanticized rain, but to the door each time the bell chimed. A slight tension would gather in her shoulders, then release when it wasn't whoever she was waiting for. She wasn't just an artist. She was someone anticipating, with a mix of hope and dread. The waitress refilled her water, and Elara's entire demeanor shifted. A bright, practiced smile, a nod of thanks, eyes that crinkled warmly but didn't fully engage. The smile vanished the millisecond the waitress turned away, replaced by that earlier quiet vigilance. This was the first secret psychology. A woman's public face is often a masterpiece of diplomacy, her private one a canvas of unmixed emotions. The key isn't to be fooled by the masterpiece, but to respectfully notice the raw canvas beneath. Leo saw her check her phone, not for the time, but with a specific swiping motion. A missed connection. A text unreplied to. Her sigh was almost imperceptible, a mere deflation of her ribs, but it spoke volumes. He was witnessing not a mystery, but a story told in the margins. The set of her jaw, the way she tucked a strand of hair not for vanity, but for self-comfort, the protective curl of her body around the sketchbook. These were the sentences and paragraphs of her current chapter. And Leo, the silent reader in the corner, was beginning to understand that to know a woman's mind, you must first learn to read the text of her silence. The catalyst of spilled tea and a broken facade. The bell above the cafe door jangled, harsh and insistent. A man in a suit, phone clamped to his ear, barged in, shaking water from his coat like a dog. He beelined for the counter, his voice a loud, transactional drone about a missed meeting. The sudden intrusion shattered the cafe's soft cocoon of sound. Startled, Elara's hand jerked, knocking her nearly full mug of hibiscus tea. Crimson liquid cascaded over the table, a vivid flood rushing toward the edge and into her lap. She gasped, jumping up as the hot liquid soaked into her linen trousers. The sketchbook tumbled to the floor, pages splaying open. In that moment, every constructed layer fell away. The poised artist vanished. What remained was a flustered, embarrassed woman, biting her lip hard, eyes glistening not from the heat of the tea, but from the sting of public clumsiness and a ruined afternoon. The man on the phone didn't even notice. Leo was moving before he had consciously decided to. He didn't approach her directly. That would amplify the attention. Instead, he grabbed a handful of napkins from the dispenser at his own table and snagged the clean, dry towel a waiter had left on a recently vacated table nearby. He walked to her table, placed the materials quietly within her reach on a dry patch, then bent and carefully gathered the fallen sketchbook. His eyes couldn't help but see the top page. It wasn't a scenic sketch. It was a detailed, almost aching drawing of an empty chair by a window, sunlight streaming onto its seat. The title, scrawled in the corner, read, "Waiting for You." He closed the book gently, shielding its intimate confession, and placed it back on the table, safe from the spill. "The chair looks like it misses the sunlight," he said, his voice low, meant only for her. He wasn't commenting on her accident, her appearance, or offering a cliché, "You okay?" He acknowledged the art, the emotion he'd glimpsed within it, the loneliness, the anticipation. He then turned his attention to helping stem the tide on the table, his actions practical and undramatic. Elara stared at him, frozen for a second, the napkins clutched in her hand. Most men, she thought, would have either made a clumsy joke, offered an over-the-top rescue, or used it as a blatant in. This man had seen her spill, seen her art, and had chosen to speak to the art, to the feeling, not the incident. He had respected the spilled secret of her sketchbook more than the spilled tea. Her defensive, flustered energy shifted. The tears that were threatening from embarrassment receded, replaced by a look of profound, surprised curiosity. It does, she finally said, her voice softer than he'd imagined. It misses it very much. In that exchange, Leo demonstrated the second secret. A woman's mind is deeply disarmed not by a solution to a practical problem, but by a recognition of her emotional reality. You don't fix her spill. You acknowledge her sunlit, empty chair. The arithmetic of attention and the calculus of trust. The waiter arrived with more towels, clucking sympathetically. Elara mopped up the last of the spill, her movements slower now, more deliberate. The crisis had passed, but a new, charged quiet had taken its place. Leo remained standing a respectful distance away, not presuming to stay, but not fleeing the scene either. "Thank you," Elara said, finally looking directly at him. Her eyes were a hazel-flecked green, sharp with intelligence and the lingering vulnerability of the moment. "For the towel, and for rescuing the sketchbook." "It looked important," Leo replied simply, nodding toward the closed book. He didn't smile widely, which could seem predatory or overly pleased. Instead, his expression held a quiet, shared understanding of accidents, of fragile things. "I'll let you get back to your waiting." He began to turn, the act itself a question. "It seems my wait has been indefinitely postponed," she said, the words leaving her in a rush of released breath. She gestured to the empty, tea-stained seat opposite her. "The least I can do is offer you a dry chair. Can I buy you a fresh coffee?" This was the critical juncture. Most men would pounce, sliding into the seat with eager speed, immediately steering the conversation toward interrogation. "Who were you waiting for? What do you do?" Leo did the opposite. He hesitated, just for a beat, his gaze flickering to the chair and then back to her. He was giving her a silent moment to reconsider, to retract the offer without awkwardness. It was a gift of power back to her. "Only if I can order a replacement for the hibiscus tea," he said, finally accepting. He sat, but his posture remained open, angled slightly away rather than leaning in aggressively. He didn't fill the silence. He let it be, watching as she carefully blotted her trousers, giving her space within the shared space. When the new drinks arrived, she spoke first. "I'm Elara." "Leo." "So, Leo," she began, cradling her warm mug, "you're not like the guys who usually try to talk to me in cafes." It wasn't a flirtation. It was an observation, a test. "How so?" he asked, genuinely curious about her perception. "You watched, but you didn't stare. You helped, but you did hover. And you spoke to my drawing, not to me." She tilted her head. It was unnervingly perceptive. Leo took a sip of his coffee. Most people watch the mouth to hear what's being said. They miss what the whole face is saying before a word is spoken. They see the action, but not the reaction right after. He was revealing his method, not as a pickup tactic, but as a philosophy. You weren't just drawing. You were having a conversation with someone who wasn't there. The door, the phone, the empty chair in your sketch. The story was pretty clear. Elara's cheeks flushed, but not with embarrassment this time. It was the warmth of being truly seen, not just visually observed. He hadn't solved her, he had read her. And in doing so, he had performed the third secret psychology. Building trust isn't about proving your worth, but about demonstrating your depth of perception. It's not, "Look how great I am," but "I see how interesting you are." For the first time that afternoon, her body fully relaxed into the chair. The waiting was over. A different kind of connection had begun. The rain softened to a gentle patter against the window, sealing them into the warm, coffee-scented world of the cafe. Elara traced the rim of her mug. "A conversation with someone who isn't there," she repeated softly. That's a painfully accurate way to describe the last 6 months. She didn't look sad, just analytical, as if examining a specimen of her own heart. His name was David. The chair was his favorite spot in my apartment. The sunlight hit it at 4 p.m. perfectly. He'd read there. Leo didn't offer empty condolences. He didn't claim to understand. He asked a single, quiet question. What did the sunlight mean? The question caught her off guard. Men had asked what happened. Or assured her he's a fool, trying to insert themselves into the narrative as the hero or the superior replacement. No one had ever asked about the sunlight. It meant, she paused, searching, it meant peace, a shared, quiet peace. The fight that ended it was about nothing and everything. A missed birthday, my career taking off, his insecurity, noise, but that chair, that sunlight, that was the silence we shared that was good. The space between us that felt like home, not distance. She was giving him the map of her loss, not just the coordinates of the breakup. Leo listened with his whole body, a slight nod, his eyes steady on hers but never probing. He absorbed the information not as gossip, but as data points in the architecture of her emotional world. So, you weren't just waiting for him today, Leo ventured. You were testing the memory, seeing if the hope of that quiet peace was stronger than the reality of the noisy end. Elara's breath hitched. It was an exact diagnosis. She had agreed to meet David for the first time in months, a friendly coffee, and he had stood her up. The old hope had warred with the proven reality, and the sketchbook had been the battlefield. "How did you?" "It's in what you didn't do," Leo said. "You checked your phone for a message, not to send one. You were prepared for disappointment, the tension at the door, but you hoped anyway. That's a specific kind of courage. And the art, it wasn't angry. It was mournful. For the sunlight, not for the man who left the chair empty. He was separating the person from the feeling, honoring the loss of the piece itself. In that moment, Elara felt a surreal clarity. This stranger had dissected the emotional core of her past relationship with more acuity than her own therapist. He wasn't leveraging it, he was simply acknowledging its complexity. This was the fourth secret. A woman's past is not a scorecard for you to beat, nor a wound for you to heroically heal. It is a landscape. To understand her mind, you must learn to read its topography, the valleys of hurt, the peaks of past joy, the quiet rivers of what truly mattered to her. He wasn't trying to plant his flag on it, he was just showing her he could see it. A comfortable silence settled between them, no longer charged with anticipation or accident, but with a new, profound resonance. Elara felt strangely light, as if Leo's perceptive words had untangled a knot in her chest she'd grown used to. "You know," she said, a faint, wry smile touching her lips, "this is the part where I'm supposed to ask, so why are you so good at this? And you'll give me some smooth line about being a student of human nature or having sisters." Leo chuckled, a low, genuine sound. "And what would you believe if I said that?" "I'd believe it was a deflection," she said, her gaze steady. "This level of observation, it doesn't come from just being a good brother. It feels learned. Earned, maybe even." She trailed off, cautious. "Scarred over?" he finished for her, his own guard lowering a fraction. He didn't confirm or deny, but his acceptance of her word was confirmation enough. He rotated his coffee cup. "Let's just say I spent a long time reading the wrong chapters in people, making loud, wrong assumptions. I caused hurt by being oblivious. The motivation to learn wasn't charm. It was restitution." This admission changed everything. He wasn't a manipulator with a perfected system. He was a man who had failed, painfully, and had chosen to become a diligent student of his own failures. His understanding wasn't a weapon, it was a tool forged in regret. Elara's defensive walls, the ones David, insecurity, and neglect had built, didn't just lower, they reconfigured. Here was a man who understood cause and effect in the emotional realm, who valued precision in understanding because he knew the cost of its absence. "What are you reading now?" she asked, nodding toward the book he'd been pretending to read earlier. "Or were you just using it as camouflage?" He slid the book across the table. It was a dense, annotated volume on architectural theory. "Genuine interest," he said. "I design libraries. The quiet spaces between the shelves, how light falls in a reading room, it's not so different from noticing where the sunlight hits a chair at 4 p.m. It's about designing for a feeling." The connection was almost too perfect, too serendipitous. But it wasn't a line. It was his life's work meeting hers in a metaphor they'd co-created. He saw spaces for people to feel. She captured feelings in spaces. The recognition was mutual and dizzying. This was the fifth, and perhaps most crucial, secret psychology. Ultimate understanding is not a one-way analysis. It requires a man to be vulnerable enough to show his own emotional blueprint, his own scars of learning. It transforms the dynamic from observer-subject to a shared human experience. He wasn't just seeing her, he was allowing her to see the mechanism of his sight. And in that mirror, Elara didn't see a predator, a rescuer, or a distraction. She saw a potential counterpart. The cafe around them buzzed with renewed activity, the rain had stopped, and a weak, late afternoon sun broke through the clouds, casting a long, warm beam across their table. It illuminated the steam rising from their cups, the worn cover of his book, her hands resting peacefully beside her rescued sketchbook. The empty chair was forgotten. This one was occupied. The sunbeam crossing the table felt like a tangible thread, connecting Leo's confession to Elara's quiet revelation. The noise of the cafe, the hiss of the espresso machine, the chatter of new customers, faded into a distant hum. In this newly carved-out silence, something shifted from analysis to potential. "A library designer," Elara repeated, her artist's mind instantly conjuring images. "Do you design for the grand, awe-inspiring silence or the small, private one?" It was a test, but a different kind, not of his motives, but of his depth. "The small one," Leo answered without hesitation, his eyes alight with professional passion. The grand silence can be intimidating. It demands reverence. But the small silence, the nook by a window, the perfect pool of light from a specifically angled clear-story window, the chair that feels embraced by shelves, that's the silence that invites you to whisper your own thoughts. That's the space where people feel safe to be themselves. He was, unmistakably, describing the emotional effect of his work. He designed for the feeling she drew. Elara felt a spark of creative synergy, so potent it was physical. She opened her sketchbook, not to the page of the empty chair, but to a fresh one. With quick, sure strokes, she began to draw not a person, but a space. The curve of a modern archway, the suggestion of shelves receding into shadow, and a single chair bathed in intricate, geometric sunlight from an unseen, complex window above. She slid the book toward him. "Is that the small silence?" she asked. Leo stared at the drawing. It was more than a sketch. It was a translation of his philosophy into her visual language. It was her understanding of his understanding. "That's exactly it," he said, his voice hushed with awe. "You even got the light pattern I was describing in my thesis. How?" "I listened," she said simply, echoing his earlier lesson. "You didn't just tell me what you do, you told me why. The why has a shape." In that moment, any remaining teacher-student, observer-observed dynamic dissolved. They were in a collaborative orbit. Leo was not applying a secret psychology. He was engaging in a mutual discovery. The greatest understanding of a woman's mind, or any mind, occurs when perception becomes a dialogue, not a dissection. He looked from the drawing to her face, illuminated by the same sunlight she'd put on the page. "Elara," he said, the name feeling new on his tongue. "The person who stood you up today, he was an editor of your past. I find myself desperately wanting to be a reader of your present, and maybe, if I'm very careful, a co-author of a future page or two." It wasn't a grandiose promise. It was a proposition framed in their shared language, books, pages, stories. It acknowledged her past without dwelling in it, honored the profound connection of the present, and proposed a future with deliberate, humble specificity. Elara closed the sketchbook. She didn't need to draw anymore. The scene she was in was the one she wanted to capture. "I think," she said, a real, unguarded smile finally reaching her eyes, "that the next page is blank, and I'd very much like to see what we might write on it together, starting with my phone number, and maybe a tour of one of your small, silent spaces." The wait had ended. The lonely, sunlit chair was now just a beautiful, sad memory. Here at this table, in this clean, well-lighted place they had built together word by word, glance by glance, a new story was beginning. Not with a dramatic climax, but with the quiet, profound turning of a page.